At 9:14 on a Friday night, the last elevator in the building went dark, and the deadbolts on every floor clicked shut at once. I realized two things almost at the same time. The first was that I was locked inside my own office until Monday morning. The second was that I was not alone. Her name was Priya Ramanathan, and she was the one coworker I had spent 11 months carefully, deliberately, professionally not falling for. By 9:16, she had already found the light switch. By 9:17, she had turned every light in the room off, sat down on the edge of my desk in the blue glow of the emergency exit sign and said, in a voice I had never heard her use in a meeting, "Come here, I want to show you something. I'm going to tell you the whole night, but before I do, I need you to understand something about me, because otherwise none of what I did will make sense." I kept a spare charger, a backup umbrella, and an emergency granola bar in my desk drawer. And I had never once, not a single time in my adult life, done anything reckless on purpose. That Friday, all of that ended. My name is Elliot Vance. I was 31 that year. I worked as a data analyst at a mid-sized logistics company in a glass tower where the air conditioning hummed like a held breath, and the carpet was the exact gray of a rainy Tuesday. I was good at my job in the way careful people are good at jobs, reliable, unremarkable. The person managers trusted with the boring emergencies and forgot at the fun parties. My whole life ran on a simple principle: if you never reach for anything, you can never drop it. I had reasons. 2 years earlier, I'd asked a woman I loved to marry me, and she'd said yes. 8 months later, she'd said something closer to the truth, which was that being with me felt like living in a waiting room, comfortable, climate-controlled, and going nowhere. She wasn't cruel about it. That was almost the worst part. She just packed slowly, apologized often, and left me with the distinct impression that I had been the safest mistake she ever made. After that, I decided safe was the whole personality. Safe doesn't get left. Safe doesn't get surprised. And then the company hired Priya. She joined the strategy team the previous spring. And within a week, the entire floor rearranged itself around her the way iron filings arrange around a magnet. She wasn't loud. That was the thing people got wrong about her. She was the opposite of loud. She noticed things. She'd walk past your desk, glance at your screen for half a second and say, "That formula is going to break at row 4000, hey." And she'd be right. And she'd already be gone before you finished being annoyed about it. She noticed me too. That was the problem. Most people at that company looked at me and saw furniture. Priya looked at me like I was a locked drawer she was mildly curious about. And I had spent 11 months making sure that drawer stayed shut. Because the last time I'd opened myself up to someone, they'd redecorated and moved out. So here's the question I want you to sit with. The same one I was sitting with in that dark office. What do you do when the one person who actually sees you is standing 3 feet away in the dark, telling you to come closer, and every instinct you own is screaming at you to reach for the exit instead? Hold on to that. Because I promise you, by the end of this, I'm going to tell you the exact moment I stopped running. But we're not there yet. We're still at 9:17 and the lights are off. And I have absolutely no idea what she wants to show me. Let me back up 90 minutes because the night didn't start in the dark. It started with a spreadsheet and a deadline nobody wanted. Our biggest client, a regional grocery chain that shipped through 6 of our warehouses, had moved their quarterly review up by 3 days. The reforecast that was supposed to be due Wednesday was suddenly due Monday at 8 a.m. Our manager, Doug, had delivered this news at 4:45 on Friday with the particular cheerfulness of a man who was about to leave for a lake house. "You two are the only ones who understand the model," he'd said, which was Doug's way of saying he'd already decided we were staying. So the floor emptied out the way offices do on a Friday, a slow tide of jackets and have a good weekends and the smell of somebody's abandoned microwave popcorn. It left just the two of us, Priya at her desk near the windows, me at mine near the wall. The hum of the servers and roughly 2,000 rows of freight data that refused to reconcile. Here's a real thing about that kind of night, and it matters for everything that comes after. Psychologists call it the mere exposure effect. Spend enough time near someone, and your brain quietly upgrades them from stranger to safe to important, whether you meant it or not. It's not romance. It's just proximity doing its slow, patient work under the hood. And there's a companion to it, something researchers named misattribution of arousal, where your body gets keyed up by one thing, stress, adrenaline, a looming deadline, and your brain, looking for someone to blame, points at the nearest interesting person and says, "It must be them." I knew all of this. I could have cited you the page numbers. And I want you to notice something because I only noticed it much later. Knowing exactly why you're falling for someone does absolutely nothing to stop you from falling. It just gives you a nicer vocabulary for the descent. For the first hour, we worked mostly in silence. Then Priya rolled her chair across the aisle she never walked when she could roll and parked it next to mine. Your warehouse 4 numbers are lying to you, she said. My warehouse 4 numbers are fine. Your warehouse 4 numbers are off by 11%, and you've been staring at them for 40 minutes without seeing it, which means you've stopped seeing them at all. She reached over, took my mouse, just took it. The way she took everything, like the concept of asking was a formality other people needed, and highlighted a column. There. Someone double-counted the returns. She was right, of course she was right. How do you do that? I asked. Do what? See the thing everyone else misses. She looked at me, then really looked. In a way that made me want to check whether my collar was straight. I pay attention, she said. It's not a superpower. Most people just decided a long time ago to stop looking closely at things. Including themselves. She rolled back to her desk before I could decide whether that was an insult. Especially themselves, she added, not turning around. I told myself she meant the spreadsheet. I knew she didn't mean the spreadsheet. By 8:40, we'd fixed the returns error and broken something else in the process, which is the natural law of spreadsheets. Priya announced she needed coffee, or a personality transplant, whichever the vending machine has, and disappeared toward the break room. I stayed hunting for the new bug, and that's when the building started shutting down around us. The first sign was the air. The constant hum of the HVAC, the sound you stop hearing after a week in an office. The way you stop hearing your own heartbeat just stopped. The silence it left behind was enormous. Then the overhead lights dimmed to their after-hours setting a sickly half-glow. Then, somewhere below us, I heard a series of heavy metallic clunks moving up through the floors like a slow drumbeat, and I understood. A half-second too late what they were. Maglocks, the building's automated security system. On Friday nights, the maglocks sealed the whole tower at 9 sharp. Every stairwell door, every elevator, and the parking garage locked as a cost-saving measure facilities had installed the previous year. And nobody on our floor had ever thought about it because none of us were there at 9 on a Friday. Nobody except us. I got to the main stairwell door at 9:14 and pulled the handle. It didn't move. Not stuck. Locked. It was the kind of lock with a magnet the size of a hardcover book behind it, holding 400 pounds of force. I badged my card against the reader. The reader gave me a small red light. It was the electronic equivalent of a shrug. Priya appeared at the end of the hallway holding 2 vending machine coffees, watching me rattle a door that was never going to open. Let me guess, she said. We're locked in. We're locked in. She didn't panic. I want to be clear about that because it's the first thing I loved about her that night, even though I wasn't ready to call it love. She didn't gasp or catch her breath or do any of the things a movie would have her do. She walked over, handed me one of the coffees, and tried the door herself once, not because she doubted me, I think, but because she was the kind of person who confirmed things personally. Then she leaned her back against the immovable door, slid down until she was sitting on the floor, took a sip of the worst coffee in the building, and said, well, I always wondered what you'd be like when your plans fell apart. Here's where I have to tell you the truth about the next few minutes, because if I clean it up, you won't believe the rest. I did what I always do. I made a plan. I called building security straight to a voicemail that informed me the facilities office reopened Monday at 7. I called the after-hours emergency line printed on a laminated sign by the elevator. A very tired man named Gerald informed me that yes, the maglocks were on a hard timer, and no, he could not override them remotely, and no, he was not going to drive 45 minutes to physically let out 2 employees who had chosen to stay late, when the doors would release on their own at 6 a.m. It's not an emergency, Gerald said, unless it's a fire. Is it a fire? It was not a fire. Then it's a sleepover, Gerald said and hung up. I stood there holding my phone and felt the old familiar panic start to rise. It was the specific dread of a careful man watching his carefulness fail to matter. And I started out loud to list our options. We could try the other stairwell. We could look for a facilities key. We could call the fire department, though that felt dramatic. We could, Elliot. I kept going. There was a service elevator maybe, and if the badge system had a Elliot. Priya was still on the floor, still calm, looking up at me with an expression I couldn't read in the half-light. We're not getting out until 6. You know that, I know that. You can spend the next 9 hours filing a complaint with a locked door or what? She stood up slowly, brushing off the back of her slacks. Or you can come sit down and we can figure out how to survive a night with no air conditioning. One packet of stale peanuts in each other. A pause. Which honestly is the scariest option, so I understand the appeal of the door. And that's the thing I want you to hold on to the second open loop of this night. Because I could have kept working the problem. I could have stayed by that door until my knuckles were raw. That would have been the safe version of Elliot Vance. The one who'd been leased that body for 31 years and never once broken the terms. Instead, I looked at her standing there in the blue glow, unbothered, unhurried. Unafraid in exactly the places I was most afraid, and I felt something shift. Not romance, not yet. Something quieter and more dangerous than that. I felt curious. I put my phone in my pocket and I went to sit down. I just didn't know yet that sitting down was the reckless thing. That for a man like me, the reckless thing was never the grand gesture. It was the small surrender. It was choosing for once to stay in the room. We ended up in the big conference room on the north side. The one with the long table and the wall of windows looking out over the city. It was cooler there. The glass held the night's chill and the view was, I'll admit, spectacular in a way I'd never noticed during a single Monday budget meeting. 10 million lights spread out below us. Traffic moving in slow red rivers. Somewhere out there, everyone else's Friday night happening without us. Priya climbed up and sat on the conference table itself, her back to the window, legs crossed. The city glittering behind her like she'd ordered it as a backdrop. And then she said the line. The one I still hear sometimes right before I fall asleep. She reached over to the wall panel and turned off the last light in the room. The little recessed spots over the table. The only illumination left was the city itself, pouring in cold and silver through the glass. Come here, she said, patting the table beside her. I want to show you something. And you can't see it with the lights on. I want to tell you I walked over with confidence. I didn't. I walked over the way you walk toward the edge of a high diving board when you're 8 years old and you've already told everyone you're going to jump. I climbed up onto the table next to her, a careful 18 inches of professional distance between us. Because some habits don't die, they just get quieter, and I looked where she was looking. The lights, she said softly. Look at the pattern, not the whole thing, the pattern. And I looked, and after a moment I saw it. From up there in the dark, the city wasn't chaos. It was structure. The grid of the downtown streets, the bright artery of the highway, the dark rectangle of the park like a missing tooth. The way the whole thing pulsed almost as the traffic lights cycled in slow waves across the miles. I come up here sometimes, she said, when everyone's gone. I tell security I'm working late. A small laugh. I am working late, I just also do this. I turn off the lights and I watch the city run itself. And I think about how every single one of those lights is a person who is absolutely certain that their night is the important one. She was quiet for a second. It makes me feel less alone. Which is a strange thing for a view of 100,000 strangers to do, but there it is. I looked at her profile in the silver light, and I understood all at once that Priya Ramanathan, the woman who took your mouse without asking, who fixed your spreadsheet and your ego in the same sentence, who nobody on that floor would have described as lonely in 100 years, had just handed me something. A real thing, a true thing. The most vulnerable sentence I'd ever heard her say, and she'd said it to me in the dark, where she didn't have to watch my face receive it. Why are you showing me this? I asked. My voice came out lower than I meant it to. She turned then, and the 18 inches between us suddenly felt like a decision instead of a distance. Because, she said, you're the only person here who I thought might actually see it. Now. I told you at the start that I'd tell you the exact moment I stopped running. This wasn't it. I want to be honest with you about that because the temptation when you tell a story like this is to pretend you were braver than you were. The truth is that in that moment, with the city pouring silver light across her face and her question hanging in the air, I did what cowards in nice sweaters have always done. I made a joke. You brought me up here to look at traffic patterns, I said. Priya. I've spent 11 months thinking you were the most interesting person on this floor, and now I learn your secret is that you like infrastructure. She blinked. And then, thank God, she laughed, really laughed, surprised out of herself. The moment released its grip on both of us, and we were just two coworkers on a table again. And I felt the specific relief of a man who had successfully avoided being known. But here's what I've learned since, and I want to give it to you straight. Because it's the closest thing to a lesson I've got. That relief is a liar. That relief is the exact feeling my ex-fiancé must have felt every single day for 3 years. It was the comfortable climate-controlled relief of a room where nothing was ever risked. I had spent 2 years believing I'd been abandoned. Sitting on that table, I finally understood the truer, uglier thing I hadn't been left because I was too safe. I'd been left because I made safety the whole relationship. I asked another person to move into a waiting room and call it a home. I didn't have that insight yet up on the table. I just felt the relief. But something in me had cracked. For the first time in a long time, a little light was getting in. So when Priya said, "Okay, well, if my infrastructure fetish is too much for you, you can tell me your most boring secret and we'll be even," I didn't reach for the safe answer. I reached for the true one. "I don't have a boring secret," I said. "That's my secret. I've made my entire life so boring that there's nothing left to hide. I've got a spare umbrella and a backup charger. I have never surprised anyone, including myself, not even once in 31 years. I stared out at the city. My fiancé left me because being with me was like sitting in a waiting room. And the worst part is she was right and I heard it. And my response was to build a better waiting room. Silence. The city hummed below us. I couldn't believe I'd said it. I'd never said it to anyone. I'd barely said it to myself. Priya didn't say, "I'm sorry." She didn't reach over and touch my arm and do the thing people do. She just sat with it the way she sat with a broken formula. Patiently, seriously, like it deserved her full attention. Then she said, "Can I tell you what I actually saw the first week I worked here? Please." I saw a man who was so afraid of being too much for someone that he decided to be nothing for everyone. And I thought, she paused, choosing the words the way she chose everything precisely. I thought, there's a whole person in there and he's guarding the door like there's something worth stealing. And he won't let anyone in to find out there is. I turned to look at her. "That's what I've got, Elliot," she said quietly. "That's my boring secret. I've been paying attention to you for 11 months. Let me pause the night here because you need to understand who Priya actually was, or the rest of this won't land. And also, I'll be honest because I need a second, even now telling it. Priya had grown up the youngest of 4 in a house where, as she put it, the only way to get a word in was to be the one who noticed the thing nobody else did. Her sisters were louder. Older, more obviously impressive, so she became the noticer. The one who saw the crack in the ceiling before it leaked. The tension between her parents before it became a fight. The exact right moment to make a joke that would break it. She turned attention into a survival skill and then into a career and then somewhere along the way. Into a wall because here's the thing, nobody tells you about being the person who sees everyone. Nobody sees you. If you're always the one paying attention, you're never the one being paid attention to. If you're always the one who notices the room, you're never the person the room notices. She'd spent 30 years being the most perceptive person in every space she entered and the loneliest. And those two facts were the same fact. That's why the view mattered. That's why she came up to that dark room and watched the city and felt less alone. Because up there for a few minutes, she wasn't the noticer. She was just a person in the dark and the whole indifferent, glittering city was for once something she got to receive instead of decode. And she'd brought me into it. That was the part I couldn't get past. In 11 months, I had let exactly no one behind my wall and I'd assumed arrogantly, stupidly, that I was the only one on that floor with a wall at all. But the woman who took your mouse without asking had built her wall out of the opposite bricks. Mine was made of retreat. Hers was made of reach, of getting to everyone else before they could get to her. Of being so useful and so sharp and so ahead of you that you never got close enough to see she was hoping you'd try. 2 people, 2 walls, built for opposite reasons out of the same fear. And a locked door had just trapped us on the same side of both of them. There's a word for this that I only found later reading late at night the way I do. Psychologists talk about self-verification. The strange, powerful human need to be seen accurately. Even more than to be seen flatteringly, we don't just want to be loved. We want to be known correctly down to the parts we're ashamed of. Being loved for a version of you that isn't real is the loneliest thing there is. My fiancé had loved a comfortable idea of me. Priya, in One Night in the Dark, had described the real one, the coward guarding an empty vault. Instead of driving her away, that description made her lean closer. I didn't have the vocabulary yet. Up on that table, all I knew was that my heart was going far too fast for a man sitting perfectly still. And that misattribution of arousal was a real and documented phenomenon, and also, right now, an insulting oversimplification. Because there was no deadline left to blame it on. There was just her. We talked for hours. I mean, that literally, I looked at my phone at one point, and it was 1:40 in the morning, and I genuinely could not account for where 4 hours had gone, which had never once happened to me. A man who could tell you what he'd been doing at any 15-minute interval of any given Tuesday. We migrated off the table eventually and built a ridiculous nest on the conference room floor out of the emergency blankets from the earthquake kit, which it turns out every office has, and which are made of the same foil as a baked potato. We raided the break room, pooling our findings like scavengers. Her packet of stale peanuts, my emergency granola bar, 3 vending machine snacks liberated with a coat hanger, and a technique Priya swore she'd learned in college and refused to elaborate on. We drank terrible coffee gone cold, and then, when the machine finally stopped working entirely, tap water out of mugs that said things like, "World's okayest employee." And we talked. God, we talked. She told me about her sisters. I told her about my ex, the whole thing. Not just the highlight reel of blame, but the real version where I was the problem too. She told me she'd almost quit 3 months in because the work bored her and only stayed because... And here she stopped. And looked at me and didn't finish the sentence and didn't need to. I told her about my father, who'd also been a careful man and kept a spare everything. And who died at 63, having, to my knowledge, never done a single reckless thing on purpose. At his funeral, I realized I was building the exact same life in the exact same small safe. Airless coffin at the end of it. I'd never told anyone that. Not the therapist I'd seen 4 times before deciding it was too much feeling for 1 week. Not my ex. Not my own reflection. Why me? I asked her at some point in the deep middle of the night, when the city had thinned to its stubborn all-night lights. Why tell me all this? You could have picked anyone on that floor. Half of them are more fun than I am. All of them are less locked. Priya lay on her back on the foil blankets, looking up at the ceiling tiles. She took a long time to answer. You want the honest version or the flattering one? Honest. Always honest. I've had enough flattering to last a lifetime. The honest version is that I didn't pick you, she said. A magnetic lock picked you. If Doug had made literally anyone else stay tonight, I'd probably be having this conversation with them. A pause. And then quieter, that's the honest version, and it's a lie. And I'm telling you it's a lie in the same breath because the true version is scarier. The true version is that I've stayed late on this floor 40 times in the last year. And there was only one night I ever hoped the doors would lock. The city hummed. My heart did the thing. This is the one, she said, in case that wasn't clear. This is the night I hoped for. I need to stop here and talk to you directly for a second. I know some of you have been in a version of this room. Not literally, maybe you've never been locked in an office in your life. But the room where someone you've been careful about finally says the true thing and drops it in your lap. And looks at you and waits. Most people think the hard part of that moment is finding the courage to say something back. The big speech. The grand return. Look closer, though, and you'll see the hard part is actually the opposite. The hard part is that in the half second after someone hands you their real self, your nervous system offers an escape hatch. It's polished and obvious and always feels like relief. A joke, a deflection. Wow, it's late. We should probably try to sleep. Anything that lets you take what they gave you and not have to give anything back. The hatch is always there. It's always open. And it always feels like relief. I'd taken that hatch my whole life. I was by any reasonable measure a professional grade hatch taker. So when Priya said, "This is the night I hoped for," and turned her head to look at me across a foot of foil blanket and a lifetime of my own careful cowardice, I felt the hatch swing open bright and welcoming, right on schedule. And this is the moment I promised you at the very beginning. The one where I stopped running. I didn't take the hatch. I turned my head and looked at her. I said the most terrifying true thing I had in me. It wasn't "I love you" because I didn't have the right to that yet. And it wasn't a joke because I'd finally run out of them. What I said was, I don't know how to do this. I'm going to be bad at it. I'm going to reach for the safe thing about 400 times. I need you to know that when I do, it's not because I don't want you. It's because wanting things is the part I amputated to survive. And I don't have a lot of practice growing it back. I took a breath that shook on the way out. But I want to try, with you, starting now, in this stupid foil nest. That's the reckless thing I've got. I'm sorry it's not bigger. Priya was very still. Then she said, Elliot, that's the biggest thing anyone's ever said to me. And she reached across the foot of blanket and took my hand. Not the way she took my mouse or the confident swipe of a woman who never asks. She did it slowly, giving me every chance to pull away, threading her fingers through mine like she was solving me one finger at a time. And I didn't pull away. For once in my life, I stayed exactly where the fear was. We didn't kiss, not then. I want to tell you that because I think it matters. We just lay there on the floor of a locked office holding hands watching the ceiling. Two walls quietly coming down in the dark. And it was more intimate than anything I had ever done with the lights on. Around 4 a.m, she fell asleep. She'd been mid-sentence something about a beach her family used to go to, about the specific sound of her sisters arguing over a radio station, and then her voice just softened and slowed and stopped. And her hand went loose in mine and she was gone, breathing slow. Her face doing the thing faces only do when their owner has stopped guarding them. I lay there in the dark, wide awake and terrified, holding the hand of a sleeping woman I'd spent 11 months not falling for and then fallen for in 7 hours. I did the most Elliot Vance thing imaginable. I started to plan an exit, not from her, from the feeling. I lay there and my careful brain got to work, the way it always did at the first sign of something real, building me a nice, reasonable case for why this couldn't work. We were coworkers, HR had opinions about coworkers. It was the middle of the night, people say things at 4 a.m. They don't mean at 4 p.m. She'd been trapped with me. Of course she'd reached for connection. It was misattribution of arousal, it was proximity. It was the mere exposure effect, it was every study I could cite. It was anything except the simple, unbearable possibility that a woman who saw everything had looked directly at me and wanted what she saw. I built that exit for maybe 20 minutes. I got it fully constructed. I could see the whole escape route. I'd be warm but careful on Monday. I'd let it fade. I'd protect us both from the mess of it. I'd call that protection maturity, the way I always did. And then Priya, without waking up, without any awareness at all, tightened her fingers around mine. Just tightened them. It was a small unconscious reflex from somewhere below thought. The part of a person that doesn't know how to lie because it doesn't know any other move. Her sleeping hand held onto my waking one like it had made a decision her careful daytime self would spend weeks catching up to. And every single wall in my nicely constructed exit route just fell. Because here's the thing I finally understood lying on that floor at 4 a.m. With the whole indifferent city glittering outside and this one specific person holding my hand in her sleep, I had spent 2 years believing the lesson of my life was don't reach because reaching gets you left. And it was precisely 100% backwards. I hadn't been left because I reached. I'd been left because I never did. The waiting room wasn't safe. The waiting room was the thing that killed it. Safety hadn't protected me from loss. Safety had just made the loss quieter, slower, and lonelier. And dressed it up as maturity so I wouldn't notice I was the one turning off the lights. Priya reached always at everyone. Because some brave, broken part of her had decided that being too much was better than being unknown. And she was right. My whole careful life was proof that she was right. So I made a decision there in the dark holding her hand. Not a plan. I'd made enough plans. A decision which is a different and more dangerous thing. I decided that when she woke up, I was not going to be careful. I decided I was going to be the man who reached and kept reaching. And got it wrong 400 times and reached again because the alternative, the safe alternative, the waiting room alternative, was a slow, silver-lit coffin, and I'd already watched my father lie down in his. Then I did something I'd never done in my whole regimented life. I stopped planning and I just watched her sleep. And I let myself feel the enormous, terrifying size of what I felt. And I didn't reach for a single hatch. The city cycled its lights below us. Somewhere out there, 6 a.m. was coming, and with it the doors would open. I found to my complete surprise that I was in no hurry to leave. She woke at 5:40, 20 minutes before the maglocks were due to release. For a moment, she didn't know where she was, and then she did. And I watched it happen on her face. The memory of the whole night arrived, and I watched her brace just slightly. The way you brace for the possibility that the person you were brave with in the dark will be a stranger again in the light. I knew that brace. I'd invented that brace. So before she could say anything, before she could reach for her own hatch, because I understood now that she had them too, that the noticer's hatch was to make it a joke to say, well, that got weird. Blame the peanuts, I spoke first. Good morning, I said. I've been awake for a while. I did a lot of thinking. I built a really excellent exit road around 3:30, fully reasoned, HR compliant, very mature. She went still. And you held my hand in your sleep and knocked the whole thing down. I sat up on the ridiculous foil blankets. So here's where I've landed, and I'm saying it now in the light on purpose, so that neither of us gets to pretend it was a 4 a.m. thing. I don't want to be careful with you. I've been careful my whole life, and it turns out careful is just cowardice that files its taxes on time. I want to take you to dinner, a real one. Tonight if the doors ever open. I want to be bad at this out loud instead of good at nothing in private. I paused. That's it. That's the whole speech. I practiced it while you were drooling on a potato blanket. Priya stared at me, and then her face did something I'd never seen it do in 11 months. It came undone, not sad, the opposite of sad, just completely without a single wall, the noticer finally. For 1 second being the one who got noticed. I wasn't drooling, she said, and her voice cracked right down the middle of the joke. And she laughed and pressed the back of her hand to her eyes. And I understood that the crack, the undoneness was the most she'd ever let anyone see. And she was letting me see it in the light. You were a little bit drooling, I said gently. Shut up, she said, and she was crying and laughing at the same time. And she reached across the blankets and grabbed the front of my shirt with both hands. And this time she didn't ask with her eyes, and she didn't go slow. She kissed me. Every study I could have cited every mechanism, every mere exposure effect and misattribution of arousal. Every careful explanation my careful brain had built to keep me safe from exactly this went quiet all at once. There is no scientific vocabulary for the specific feeling of a wall coming down after 31 years. And there doesn't need to be. It just felt like the first honest thing I'd done since the funeral. It felt like reaching. It felt like a man walking out of a waiting room he'd been sitting in his whole life, finally. Into a morning he had no plan for whatsoever. At exactly 6:00 a.m., we both heard it. The heavy clunk of the maglocks releasing floor by floor. The sound of the building letting us go. Priya pulled back an inch her forehead against mine, both of us breathing like we'd run somewhere. The doors are open, she said. I know. We can leave now. I know. I didn't move, neither did she. Do you want to? She considered the question with her whole seriousness, the way she considered everything, and then she smiled. Not the sharp smile she used on spreadsheets, but a new one, a soft one. One I got the feeling not many people had seen. Not yet, she said. Let's watch the lights go out. So we climbed back up onto the conference table, the two of us. And we sat and watched the city do the thing it does at dawn, the streetlights blinking off in slow waves. The sky going from black to bruised to gold. 10 million windows catching fire with the sunrise one by one. And somewhere in there, her head came to rest on my shoulder. And my arm came around her as naturally as if we'd done it 100 times. As if the whole careful architecture of my life had been quietly rebuilding itself all night into a shape that could finally hold another person. We were 4 hours late leaving that building. We told Doug the maglocks glitched. I'm going to end where I started, with a locked door and a woman who turned off the lights. I've had a while now to understand what actually happened that night. And I want to give it to you before you go. I used to think the door locked me in. That the whole story was about being trapped. But the door didn't trap me. The door freed me because for one night all my exits were taken away, every hatch was welded shut. And a careful man was finally forced to stay in the room long enough to find out he could survive being known. The lock didn't take my freedom. My carefulness had been taking my freedom every single day for years. The lock just interrupted it, and Priya turning off the lights, I understand that now too. She wasn't hiding us in the dark. She was doing the only thing that ever works on a man who spent his whole life guarding an empty vault. She made it safe enough to be seen. For a little while, neither of us had to watch the other's face while we reached. The dark wasn't concealment. The dark was mercy. It was the exact amount of cover two frightened people needed to finally come out from behind their opposite walls. We've been together 3 years now. I'd like to tell you it's been easy, that I reached and kept reaching and never once bolted for a hatch. That would be a lie, and I've made her a promise about lies. The truth is, I still reach for the safe thing sometimes. I still on my worst days start building exit routes at 3 a.m. The only difference that matters is that now, when I catch myself doing it, I reach over in the dark and I find her hand instead. And it's always there, she always reaches back. Two people who spent their whole lives braced for the door to close, learning slowly, night after night, to leave it open. There's a maglock in the lobby of a glass tower downtown that seals every Friday at 9 sharp. Facilities has since fixed the glitch that trapped 2 employees overnight. Nobody gets locked in anymore. Sometimes I think that's a shame. So here's what I want to leave you with, and then I'll let you go. Somewhere in your life right now, there's a door you keep checking to make sure it's open, a relationship. A conversation, a person, a truth, an exit you keep confirming is available. Because as long as you can leave, you never have to find out what would happen if you stayed. I'm not going to tell you to lock it. I can't. That was a magnet and a Friday and a piece of luck I didn't deserve. But I am going to ask you the question Priya asked me, the one that took me 31 years and 1 locked door to answer. Are you going to spend another night guarding a door that nobody's even trying to open? Or are you going to turn off the lights and reach? If you've ever been locked in with the wrong person or the right one, or your own careful self, I want to hear about it. Tell me in the comments what you did when the door wouldn't open. Did you reach? Or did you keep checking the lock? And if this is the kind of story that stays with you a little after the video ends, we've opened memberships shorter, quieter stories every week, the ones we can only tell when the lights are off. Leave a like if you stayed to the end. Subscribe if you want to stay a little longer. And I'll see you in the next one. Priya says hi, by the way. She's reading this over my shoulder. She says the granola bar was stale, and she's never forgiven me it wasn't stale. She's reaching for my hand right now to argue about it. Some doors you leave open, and that's intentional.